What's up, everybody? This is the House Flipping Golden Nugget Podcast, episode number 5. We're back this week. We got another great episode for you, a short little golden nugget that you can put to work in your real estate investing business. Now, this week's show is a very, very important topic. It's one that is more important these days than it's ever been. Now, back in the day, probably when we recorded this show that the original Golden Nugget came from on our flagship podcast, which is called the Real Deals Podcast. If you're not listening to that, you should be. Just search for the Real Deals. It's Deals with a Z podcast in iTunes. It's under real estate investing as well. And we talk about all kinds of things. But back in the day when we recorded this particular Golden Nugget, it was crucial that you do this, but it's way more crucial even now. The reason being is because there's so much competition in the marketplace. There's a lot of people doing direct mail. There's a lot of people that are, trying to go direct to seller, trying to contact sellers, get them to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm interested in selling. And of course, you would be interested in buying. And so this week's episode is all about what to do with the return mail, right? Now, most of you probably, if you've done any direct mail, you probably have a big stack sitting somewhere and not much gets done with it, right? So you really have to build out a system for taking that return mail, skip tracing it, and figuring out how it is that you can actually contact the owner. Because the reality is that every other investor out there, or not every other investor, but we'll say the vast majority of other investors out there are not doing what's necessary to actually reach those owners. So that's why this week's show is all about what to do with that direct mail that bounces back and becomes return mail. And it's even more important now than it was when we first originally recorded this Golden Nugget. So without further ado, let's get into the show. But before we do that, remember to go subscribe to our other show as well. It's called the Real Deals Podcast. If you like this one, you'll love that one. All right, let's get into this week's Golden Nugget segment. And this week, I got a real good one for you guys. This is something that I didn't used to do when I first started, and now it's something that we do all the time, and it's made us lots and lots of money. And that is what to do with return mail. Whenever you guys do a mail campaign to any particular list, you're going to send out the mail and you'll get calls, maybe not a ton of calls on your first mailing, but you should get some calls as long as your list is good and your marketing piece is good. You're also going to get letters that get sent back to you as long as you're using first-class postage. So this is something that we make sure that we do not only with our letters, but also with our postcards, because we want to make sure that if they're not deliverable or the homes are vacant, that those letters come back to us. And when they do, it allows us to be able to determine, hey, there's a vacant property here, or it's not deliverable, somebody has died. Usually there'll be notes on the letter or something from the mail carrier letting us know what the deal is. When we get those letters back, we're then able to filter them. So we'll go through them and we'll say, okay, this one's in an A neighborhood, this one's in a B neighborhood, this one's in a C neighborhood, and we'll prioritize looking them up and doing some further due diligence to try and figure out, okay, if the owner is not there, where are they? Or who is it that owns the home now? If somebody had died, there's probably a personal rep out there somewhere that we can find. If somebody hasn't died, but they still own the home, but they've moved away, we got to try and find them because the home is currently vacant. So what we do is we get the letters back. We then prioritize them as to what quality of neighborhood it is, and then we look them up. And we have a search tool that we use called TLO, and it's a great one. There's a number of other ones out there. I know some people use LexisNexis, and there's a variety of different ones, but the one that we use is TLO, and it works great to find people that are not easily found. And that really works well, because what we'll do is we'll search them in TLO. We'll figure out, okay, if they're not living at that house, where are they living? Or if they're deceased, who's their next of kin or personal rep? And then we repackage those letters and we send them out to where the personal rep or the owner really lives. And that way, we're probably the only investor getting letters to these people, or very few, one of very few, because most investors won't do the work here needed to look people up and try and figure it out. And sometimes when they get the mail back, some investors will just throw it straight in the garbage can. They won't even look at it. So when you get your letters back, it's gold. Don't throw it away. You actually want to sift them, sort them, and get some sort of a service like TLO to be able to look up where that owner might be if they're not at that property, and get your marketing piece to them so that if they want to sell, you're right there to help them out. And if you put this to work in your business, I can guarantee you that you'll put yourself in a great position to be getting deals that other investors will not, which basically means you're in the way of making a lot of extra money. So make sure you put this to work in your business. You'll thank me for doing it. I know it's a little bit extra work, but it's well worth it. All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed the information on this week's show on all about what to do with your return mail. So make sure you skip trace, folks. Make sure you track them down, and make sure you get that mail sent back out to them, pull their phone numbers, whatever it is you got to do. Send smoke signals, send pigeons. Get in touch with these people, because if they're harder to find, that means there's potentially a better deal there on the other end once you find them. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this week's show. We'll be back again next week with another Golden Nugget. But before we leave you, just want to remind you one more time, make sure you go subscribe to our flagship show, which is the Real Deals Podcast. And, of course, if you're interested in marketing directly to sellers, you can look up our Driving $4 app in the iTunes or Google Play Store as well. And you can utilize that to create direct mail lists, custom direct mail lists that you can then market to in a variety of different ways. So make sure that you go check that out as well. But that wraps up this week's show. We'll see you all on the next one.